This is Larry Jordan, the host of the Digital Production Buzz. The following interview is an excerpt from a recent program. To hear the entire program, visit digitalproductionbuzz.com. Normally, we talk tech with Philip Hodgetts when he's wearing his hat as the CEO of Intelligent Assistance and Lumberjack System. This week, though, we're reflecting more of the spirit of the holidays as a time for friends, family, and memories. But how do we capture those memories? And that is where Philip can help. Hello, Philip. Welcome back.
Hi, Larry.
You know, Philip, when it comes to family interviews, are we talking tech or are we talking something else?
We're talking something else. I wish I could find a way of making this an excuse to buy new tech toys, because we know we all love excuses to buy new tech toys. But no, recording your family history is really about appreciating the family that you have, where you come from. It's about understanding who you are as a person. And it's also, we need to capture these now because, frankly, we'll be sorry when somebody's gone and we haven't taken that time to sit down with your grandparents or aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, because there will come a time when you can't sit down with them. And to be able to go back and see their faces and hear their recollections is going to be an incredibly valuable emotional resource for you in the future.
You know, I was thinking, one of the proudest interviews I did was with my father about 5 years before he died. And I wanted to record something, and fortunately we just sat and talked. It was an audio-only interview because it was before cameras were affordable. Mm-hmm. But being able to listen to that was so helpful to us after he died that you're absolutely right. Preserving those memories, it's easy when they're here and they're easy to overlook, but they're precious because you can't go back and get them when they're gone.
It's never the most important thing. This Thanksgiving, it's not going to be the most important thing on your mind, but it should be, because, that's an opportunity to reach these people.
Well, what is it that makes interviewing family members so tricky? Don't you just sit down and throw a mic in their face and start talking?
Most people get fairly nervous when you throw a mic in their face and start talking. I think there's a sort of reluctance. Oh, funny about that. Most people, not us. And I think there's a little bit of people feeling somewhat odd about talking about themselves. Maybe that's more of an Australian problem than for Americans. But it can also be tricky because sometimes things will bring up memories that people don't really want to remember. So you need to be sensitive to those sort of things and be quite prepared to skip a question and move on. I found it a little bit easier that I was asking the same questions of everyone. And so there were no trick questions that were going to bring up something that somebody didn't want to talk about. And be sensitive too. I have a relative who's full-bodied, let's say, and she's not very comfortable about being on camera. So in the number of times that I've done interviews with her for the current project and an earlier one, we've just recorded audio and found suitable B-roll to cover. And so you need to be sensitive to your family. But at the same time, if you just start engaging people in a conversation, once they start talking, most people just keep talking. The best way to keep somebody talking is just to shut up and leave the awkward pause, because most people fill that awkward pause.
Well, you make a very interesting point. I love interviewing people. It's one of the favorite tasks that I have. But I'm not so comfortable when people interview me and I have to talk about myself. I'm much more interested in hearing what other people think than expressing what I think. How do you get people comfortable talking about what they think and what they feel? That's a hard transition to engineer.
Yeah, I started with a set of questions, and I gave people the questions ahead of time. Some just ignored them completely because they wanted to be spontaneous. Other people had quite detailed notes of what they wanted to talk about. And having that, I thought, took some of the stress out of it, so the people were no longer unsure about what they were going to be asked and what they were going to have to remember. But since I've done that original list and done the initial interviews for my family, I've discovered some really great questions, like what superpower would you like to have, or what advice would you give your younger self? These are interesting questions. And as you said, the position of an interviewer is that you will learn so much about your family. I have learned so many things about my family in the middle of interviewing one of my relatives that it's almost embarrassing that I didn't know things before. In a much earlier project, I was interviewing my aunt about my grandmother, her mother, and she just casually dropped in the conversation that my grandmother had earned her honour back twice in her life, and I think just in traditional Tasmania in the 40s and 50s. And I thought, well, I knew about the divorce. Oh dear, my mother was born out of wedlock. And that is how I learned that. So family history, family interviews can be very, very revealing. I've learned a lot about my family. Right, maybe more than I really want to find out. So be prepared for that.
Well, do you plan an interview, and if so, how do you plan it?
Yeah, well, I'm a production geek. So yes, and I'm a metadata geek. So those two things are part of what I've done with my particular family history project. I have everything set out. I use the same production kit that I use everywhere, a couple of GoPros. The reason for using two GoPros is simply because when you're trying to put things together, having two angles on something is it's leaps and bounds above having just the one angle and having to do cutaways and B-roll. It just makes it so much more flexible. And cameras are not expensive. I'm a geek, and I also want to do a long-term project, how we can make it easier for people to build these family histories and using the metadata, an easy metadata logging system, build an archive and a resource for their family to explore. That's a longer-term personal project. You do not need gear. I mean, absolutely pretty much everybody carries in their pocket all they need to do a family history video. It's called a cell phone. Capture it on that if that's all you've got. If you're listening to the Digital Production Buzz, chances are very good that you've got some production gear. Use that. The two things that I think are most important is to get good audio. I'd like people to clip a cheap lapel mic on and plug that audio in. The quality of the audio is going to make it so much more useful in the future. And a little bit of decent light and record, of course. In the modern era, we do need to remind people to record horizontally, thank you, because the world is like this.
Well, we're going to be talking with Ned Soltz in the next interview, specifically about gear for these kind of interviews. And then we're talking with Sennheiser at the end of the show, talking about how to get good quality audio, especially recorded to a mobile device. So I want to force you, much as it goes against your grain, not to talk about tech. But do you find that an interview has a structure? Or do you find that there's things you talk about at the beginning or the middle at the end? Or are you pretty random in the way you ask questions?
I have a very specific set of questions. I generated them ahead of time. I entered those into our Lumberjack system and then ate my own dog food and logged each interview as I went through. So I had very specific questions, starting with what's your earliest memory? What's your favorite memory? And going through, where did you live at different times during your life? What was school like? Questions I forgot to ask, though, things like, what was bread like when you were growing up? These tiny little things, but they capture so much of the essence of what has changed in society from the time of, the earliest memories of my family. I mean, right now, my family history goes back about 85 years with the people I can currently record. I figure I've got another 30 years, so I'm going to be capturing over 100 years of history. I want it sort of more systematically organized, and that's just who I am. So I had the same pattern with everybody. I think when you do have just a more free-form interview, though, the sort of thing that you were talking about with your father, and more of a conversation, the starting points will be fairly easy, the softball questions, something to make them comfortable just talking. So, even starting to talk about things that are favorite memories. And then over time, over the length of the interview, you can transition into things that are, well, maybe things you don't know about, things that are of your relative's history that are hidden to you. And I know veterans have a lot of difficulty talking about their time in service. So, maybe another area to be careful of. But also, it's an area where you're going to find a lot about the person and what has made them the person that they are now, if they can become comfortable enough talking to you that they can go into areas that they otherwise wouldn't talk about. And it's important that the tech not be in their face. You know, we're talking about not being techie, so exactly, we want to be completely non-techie. You know, put the camera on, you know, if you've got a cell phone, put it into an iographer or a similar device or one of those cheap tripod clamps, so it's out of the way. So it's not like you're sitting behind the camera all the time talking. You want to be just like we are, face-to-face, even if we are separated by a little technology.
I long ago learned to avoid questions which can be answered with yes or no. Do you find a particular structure, a type of question more effective? What I'm looking at is tips on wording.
Yes, the classic answer to that is that, you know, ask open-ended questions. Never ask a question that, like you said, that could be answered with a simple yes or no or I forget. So you need to open up open-ended questions like, well, what is like my example a minute ago, what was bread like when you were young? You know, could you smell it? What was the smell of bread like when you were young? Now we're bringing up smell. We're going to evoke memories because sense of smell and memory go strongly together. Favorite music in the context of favorite music. These are fairly open-ended questions. What did your family do for holidays? What was it like when you traveled the world or put that backpack on your shoulder and went to Asia for 3 months and didn't bathe the whole time? Whatever, you know, whatever stories there are to be found. And you asking questions like, did you go to high school, is going to go, yeah, and that's no. And if we'll all do that. We'll all go into an area where, oh, that's a simple question. So then you just roll into, and what was your favorite experience in high school? Or what did you love about high school? Or what did you hate about high school? Another little thing I've learned, school experiences are really all about the teachers. People who have great teachers have great school experiences. People who have bad teachers have some very bad school experiences. And also just how terrible it was for people of my aunt and mother's generation to be shut out of the more interesting world of school, be shuffled into home economics instead of being allowed to go to homemaking school instead of being allowed to go on to high school. One of my aunts is still, I think, annoyed by that to this day. And so the open-ended questions, and don't be afraid to prompt somebody with another supplementary question that you because they haven't really brought out a memory. I was interviewing my niece and asking her what role has music played in her life, a nice open-ended question. And she answers with a few bits and pieces, and I just had to prompt her that she had been Rizzo in a production of Grease just the year before, which I thought was something relevant for music in her life. So don't be afraid to prompt when you know the answer and can push the story just a little bit further, because if you push this a little bit further, ask another little inquiring question, you can find yourself sort of leafing off into interesting places that nobody really goes, because nobody has these long conversations with people anymore.
One of the tricks that I've learned, or techniques, is I start with questions that start with what and how. And I use those at the beginning, and I save the why questions until we're comfortably talking, because the why is going to get the answers that you want, but they're tending to be aggressive, and you want to make sure that they're comfortable before you ask a question like that. So the who, what, why, when, where, how are the way that I start the question. But I always start with the easy stuff first. Like you were saying, get them talking, and then once they're comfortable talking, you can get into some really interesting areas. I love your superpower question. I haven't thought of asking that.
You could search for the questions that I asked. It's available on philiphodgetts.com. It's probably back a couple of months now, but if you just search philiphodgetts.com for family history questions, I'm pretty sure that was the name of the blog post. So,
well, you did a series of blog posts, which gives me a chance to get to your website. So just repeat it again. What website can people go to learn more about your thoughts on interviews?
That would be at philiphodgetts.com, and you'd search for the family history questions post that I put up there.
Well, Philip, I wish you a very happy Thanksgiving, and thanks for taking the time to share your thoughts on doing family interviews. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, and everybody do those interviews this Thanksgiving, because you'll be thankful you did.
If you'd like to see more videos like this one, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. To stay connected and receive updates from The Buzz, sign up for our free weekly newsletter now. Or you can learn more about us on our website, And thanks for watching the Digital Production Buzz.